The gunshot echoed through the valley like a crack of thunder, sending birds scattering from the pines as Henry Hawkins urged his horse forward. Smoke still curled from the barrel of his Winchester as the would-be bandit tumbled from his mount, clutching his shoulder. The year was 1869, and lawlessness still plagued the mountain passes of Northern California, especially those leading to the remote mining communities like Weaverville. "I ain't looking for trouble," Henry called out, his deep voice carrying across the distance between them. "But I sure as hell won't shy away from it either. Now get on your horse and ride back to wherever you came from." The man scrambled onto his mount, casting a hateful glance over his shoulder before disappearing into the dense forest. Henry holstered his rifle and patted his horse's neck. "Good boy. Thunder. Let's keep moving." At 32, Henry had lived enough life for two men. After fighting in the war between the states, he drifted west, working cattle drives, hunting bounties when necessary, and eventually settling into a life that suited him, tending to a modest ranch outside Weaverville, California, and occasionally serving as a deputy when Sheriff Miller needed an extra gun. The mountain air was crisp despite it being early June. Summer came late to these elevations, and the remnants of spring still clung to the landscape. Henry guided Thunder along the narrow trail that wound through the mountains, a shortcut back to town after delivering a package to a mining camp further north. The first sign of trouble was the distant plume of black smoke rising beyond the ridge. Henry urged Thunder to a faster pace, cresting the hill that overlooked the railroad tracks that had only recently been laid through this treacherous terrain. The sight below made his blood run cold. The train had derailed, its engine tipped precariously on its side, belching smoke into the pristine mountain air. 3 passenger cars lay scattered like discarded toys, one dangling partially over a ravine. Debris littered the mountainside, splintered wood, twisted metal, and personal belongings strewn across the rocks and pine needles. "Come on, boy," Henry urged his horse down the steep slope, picking his way carefully toward the wreckage. As he approached, he could hear the moans of the injured mingling with the hiss of steam still escaping the engine. Several passengers who'd managed to free themselves were tending to others, their clothes torn and bloodied. Henry dismounted, tying Thunder to a tree well away from the carnage. "Help's coming," he called out, though he had no way of knowing when it would arrive. The nearest telegraph station was in Weaverville, a good 4 hours' ride from here. "I'm Henry Hawkins. Anyone know what happened?" An elderly man with a gash across his forehead stepped forward. "Track gave way, looks like. We were coming around that bend when the engine just went down. Rest of us followed." Henry nodded grimly. "How many aboard?" "Maybe 40 passengers plus crew." Henry moved methodically through the wreckage, helping those he could. Some had only minor injuries, cuts, bruises, a broken arm. Others were beyond help, their still forms covered with whatever could be found: jackets, blankets, a woman's shawl. He was checking one of the overturned cars when he heard a faint sound, a whimper, barely audible over the creak of settling wreckage. Following the sound, he crawled into the tilted car, climbing over upended seats and scattered luggage. "Hello? Anyone in here?" His voice echoed in the confined space. "Help, please." The voice was female, weak but determined. Henry pushed aside a fallen trunk and saw her trapped beneath an overturned seat, one arm pinned awkwardly beneath her. Blood trickled from a cut above her eye, and her dress, once fine but now torn and soot-stained, was spread around her like a wilted flower. "I'm going to get you out of there, madam," Henry said, carefully assessing the situation. "My name's Henry. What's yours?" "Catherine," she replied, her voice steadier now. "Catherine Wakefield." "Well, Miss Wakefield, I'm going to lift this seat and I need you to pull yourself free when I do. Can you manage that?" She nodded, gritting her teeth. Henry braced himself and lifted, muscles straining against the weight. With remarkable determination, Catherine pulled herself free, gasping as her injured arm came loose. "There we go," Henry said, lowering the seat and kneeling beside her. "Let me take a look at that arm." As he gently examined her injury, Henry took stock of the woman before him. She was young, mid-20s, perhaps with chestnut hair that had come loose from what must have been a careful arrangement. Despite the dirt and blood on her face, he could see she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and clear blue eyes that regarded him with a mixture of pain and relief. "I don't think it's broken," he said finally, "just badly bruised. Can you stand?" With his help, Catherine rose shakily to her feet. "My trunk," she said suddenly, looking around. "I need to find my trunk." "Madam, with all due respect, getting you to safety seems more important right now." She shook her head. "You don't understand. Everything I own is in that trunk. My future depends on it." Something in her tone made Henry pause. "Your future?" Catherine met his gaze directly. "I'm a mail-order bride," she said, her voice tinged with defiance. "I'm to be married in Weaverville, and my contract, my clothes, everything is in that trunk." Henry couldn't hide his surprise. He'd heard of mail-order brides. Of course, the West was full of men seeking wives, especially in mining towns where women were scarce, but he'd never met one in person. "Who's the lucky man?" he asked, helping her navigate through the tilted car. "Mr. Jonathan Preston," she replied. "He owns the Mercantile in Weaverville." Henry kept his expression neutral, though the name sent a jolt through him. Jonathan Preston was known throughout the county, a wealthy businessman in his 50s who'd buried 2 wives already. Not a cruel man by accounts, but cold and calculating in both business and personal matters. "I know him," Henry said simply. "Now, let's find that trunk of yours and get you out of here." After some searching, they located the trunk, miraculously intact, though it had been thrown clear of the car. Henry lugged it outside, where the scene had begun to organize itself. The uninjured passengers had created a makeshift camp, tending to the wounded and gathering what supplies they could salvage. "The next train isn't due for 3 days," an older woman informed them, "and even if someone rides for help, it'll be tomorrow at the earliest before anyone reaches us." Henry looked at the gathering clouds. "There's a storm coming too. We need shelter." He turned to Catherine. "Can you ride? My horse is strong enough to carry us both to Weaverville." She hesitated. "What about the others?" "Those who can walk will have to make for the Burton mining camp. It's about 5 miles east. The seriously injured will have to wait here for help." He lowered his voice. "The dead can wait." Catherine nodded solemnly. "I can ride. But my trunk." "I'll come back for it," Henry promised, "or send someone. But right now, we need to get you to safety and send help back for these folks." After helping organize the survivors and giving them directions to the mining camp, Henry lifted Catherine onto Thunder's back, then mounted behind her. Her body was warm against his chest, her hair carrying the faint scent of lavender beneath the smoke and dirt. "Hold tight," he said, guiding Thunder away from the wreckage. "The trail's rough, but we'll make it to Weaverville by nightfall if we push hard." As they rode, the skies darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Henry urged Thunder to a faster pace, acutely aware of Catherine's shallow breathing and the way she occasionally winced when they hit a particularly rough patch of trail. "You holding up all right?" he asked, his mouth close to her ear to be heard over the increasing rain. "Yes," she replied, though her voice betrayed her pain. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Hawkins." "Henry," he corrected. "And I don't doubt your strength, Miss Wakefield, not after seeing how you pulled yourself free from that wreck." The rain intensified, turning from scattered drops to a steady downpour. Henry felt Catherine shiver against him and knew they needed shelter. Continuing in these conditions would be dangerous. The mountain trails could turn to mudslides in minutes during a heavy storm. "There's an old line shack about a mile ahead," he said. "We'll wait out the worst of it there." By the time they reached the small wooden structure, they were both soaked to the skin. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a dirt floor and a small stone fireplace, but it was dry and solid, built to withstand mountain winters. Henry helped Catherine dismount, then led Thunder to the lean-to at the side of the cabin. Inside, the shack was dusty but intact, with a rough wooden table, a single chair, and a narrow cot against one wall. "Not much, but it'll do," Henry said, kneeling to start a fire with the wood stacked beside the hearth. "You should get out of those wet clothes. I've got a spare shirt in my saddlebag that would at least be dry." Catherine stood awkwardly by the door, water dripping from her sodden dress. I couldn't possibly. Henry got the fire started, then stood, keeping his distance to put her at ease. Miss Wakefield, I mean no disrespect, but you'll catch your death in those wet clothes. I'll step outside while you change. Propriety's all well and good, but not at the cost of pneumonia. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Henry grabbed his saddlebag, pulled out a clean flannel shirt, and handed it to her before stepping back out into the rain to check on Thunder. When he returned a few minutes later, Catherine sat by the fire, his shirt hanging loose on her slender frame, her dress spread out to dry on the chair. "Better?" he asked, removing his own wet coat and hanging it by the fire. "Much, thank you." She'd let down her hair to dry, and it fell in damp waves past her shoulders. The firelight caught the auburn highlights, making it seem alive with color. Henry busied himself with getting supplies from his saddlebag, jerky, hardtack, and a flask of whiskey. "Not exactly a fancy dinner," he apologized, offering her some of each. "I'm grateful for it." She accepted a piece of jerky. "If you hadn't come along when you did, anyone would have done the same." Catherine's blue eyes met his. "No, Mr. Hawkins, Henry, not anyone would have. I've learned that much in my 23 years. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain pound against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Henry found himself studying Catherine when she wasn't looking, the delicate curve of her jaw, the way she unconsciously tucked her hair behind her ear, the small scar near her left eyebrow that somehow added to her beauty rather than detracting from it. "May I ask," he said finally, "how a young lady like yourself comes to be a mail-order bride? You seem—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish without giving offense. "Not desperate enough," she supplied with a small smile. "Not plain or poor enough to need to sell myself to a stranger?" Henry winced. "I didn't mean—" "It's all right," she interrupted. "I'm not offended, and you're not entirely wrong to wonder." Catherine stared into the fire. "My father was a doctor in Boston. He died last winter of the same influenza that took many of his patients. My mother passed when I was young. Father left debts I couldn't pay, and my uncle made it clear his household had no room for me." Henry nodded, understanding dawning. "So you answered an advertisement?" "Several, actually. Mr. Preston seemed the most respectable. He wrote of wanting companionship in his later years, someone to help with his business affairs. He sent money for my passage and promised a comfortable home." She looked up at Henry. "I know what you're thinking. He's much older, and I've never met him. But in Boston, my choices were to become a seamstress, a servant, or," she let the implication hang in the air, "or find yourself at the mercy of men with less honorable intentions," Henry finished quietly. Catherine nodded. "Exactly. At least this way, I have a chance at a respectable life. Mr. Preston seems decent in his letters, if not particularly warm." Henry couldn't bring himself to share his knowledge of Preston, the man's coldness, his rumored mistreatment of his previous wives, the whispers about their convenient deaths. It wasn't his place to destroy this woman's hopes before she'd even arrived in Weaverville. "You're very brave," he said instead. "Coming all this way alone," she smiled wryly. "Brave or foolish? I suppose we'll find out." The storm continued through the night, forcing them to share the small cabin until morning. Henry insisted Catherine take the cot while he slept on the floor near the fire. Despite his exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, his mind filled with thoughts of the woman sleeping just a few feet away and the fate that awaited her in Weaverville. When dawn broke, the rain had stopped, though the trails would be muddy and treacherous. They set out early, Catherine now wearing her own dress, which had dried overnight, though it remained wrinkled and stained from the accident. "We should reach Weaverville by midday," Henry told her as they rode. "I'll take you straight to Dr. Miller to have that arm properly looked at." "And then to Mr. Preston," Catherine said, a note of nervousness in her voice. Henry hesitated. "Yes, although perhaps you'd like a day to rest before meeting him. The town has a small hotel. After what you've been through, no one would fault you for taking time to recover." Is there something you're not telling me about Mr. Preston? Catherine asked, her perception catching him off guard. No, Henry lied, then immediately felt guilty. That is, every man has his reputation in a small town. Preston is well respected, successful, but not well liked, she pressed. Henry sighed. It's not my place to say, Miss Wakefield. You'll form your own opinions soon enough. The rest of their journey passed in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Weaverville, Catherine straightened her posture and attempted to smooth her hair, clearly anxious about the impression she would make. The town of Weaverville had grown considerably since the gold rush days, evolving from a mining camp to a proper settlement with wooden sidewalks, a main street lined with businesses, and neighborhoods of homes spreading into the surrounding foothills. As they rode down the main street, Henry nodded to familiar faces, aware of the curious stares directed at the woman riding with him. He helped Catherine dismount in front of Dr. Miller's office, a neat white building with a small sign in the window. Let's get that arm looked at, he said, tying Thunder to the hitching post. Dr. Miller was a kind-faced man in his 60s who'd been treating the residents of Trinity County for over 20 years. He listened to their account of the train derailment with growing concern. We should send a rescue party immediately, he said, examining Catherine's arm. How many injured did you say? At least a dozen serious enough that they couldn't walk out, Henry replied. And several dead. The doctor nodded grimly. I'll speak to the sheriff about organizing men and wagons. He turned his attention back to Catherine. You're fortunate, young lady. No break, just a nasty bruise and some strained muscles. Rest it for a few days and you'll be right as rain. As they left the doctor's office, Henry saw Jonathan Preston himself walking purposefully toward them from the direction of his store. Preston was tall and lean, his once dark hair now steel gray, his face weathered but distinguished. He wore an expensive suit despite the practical nature of frontier life, a man who wanted everyone to know his status. Miss Wakefield, I presume, Preston said, approaching them with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Word travels fast in Weaverville. I heard about the derailment and that Hawkins here had rescued a young woman. When I learned your name, I knew it must be you. Catherine straightened, offering her hand. Mr. Preston. Yes, I'm Catherine Wakefield. I apologize for my appearance. The accident was quite traumatic. Preston took her hand briefly, his gaze assessing her like merchandise. No matter. You're here now, though earlier than expected. I hadn't planned to meet you at the station until tomorrow. He glanced at Henry with thinly veiled displeasure. Thank you for escorting my fiancée, Hawkins. I'll take charge of her now. Henry bristled at Preston's tone, but kept his expression neutral. Miss Wakefield should rest. She's been through a lot. Of course, Preston agreed smoothly. I've prepared rooms for her above the store. She'll want for nothing. He turned to Catherine. Your trunk? Still at the Wreckage, she replied. Mr. Hawkins kindly prioritized my safety over my possessions. I see. Preston's mouth tightened. Well, we'll have to send someone to retrieve it. Can't have you starting your new life without your belongings. He offered his arm to Catherine. Shall we? Catherine hesitated, glancing at Henry. I should thank Mr. Hawkins properly for saving my life. You can call on him another time, Preston said firmly. Right now, you need rest, and I have many things to discuss with you regarding our arrangement. Henry saw the conflict in Catherine's eyes, the desire to be polite battling with the obligation she clearly felt toward her future husband. It's all right, Miss Wakefield, he said quietly. We'll see each other again. Weaverville isn't that big. She nodded, a silent message of gratitude in her eyes. Thank you again, Mr. Hawkins, for everything. As Preston led her away, Henry watched them go, an unexpected heaviness settling in his chest. He'd only known Catherine Wakefield for a day, yet the thought of her marrying Jonathan Preston filled him with a sense of wrongness he couldn't easily dismiss. Looks like you found more than you bargained for in that wreckage, said a voice beside him. Sheriff Miller had approached without Henry noticing, a testament to how distracted he'd been. "She needs rescuing from more than just that train," Henry muttered. The sheriff followed his gaze to the retreating figures. "Preston's not a bad sort, just cold. She could do worse in these parts." "Could do a hell of a lot better, too." Miller gave him a sidelong look. "Like you, for instance?" Henry shook his head, though the thought had already crossed his mind. "I barely know her." "Didn't stop you from caring by the looks of it." The sheriff clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, we need to organize that rescue party for the train. You're the only one who knows exactly where the wreck is." For the next 2 days, Henry was occupied with the rescue efforts. A party of 20 men with wagons set out for the derailment site, bringing back the injured and, more solemnly, the dead. The cause of the accident was determined to be a weakened trestle bridge, possibly damaged by the recent rains. Throughout it all, Henry found his thoughts returning to Catherine. He'd glimpsed her a few times in town, walking with Preston, being introduced to prominent citizens, shopping for necessities to replace what was still missing. Her trunk had been recovered, but many items inside had been damaged. On the 3rd day after the accident, Henry was repairing a fence on his small ranch when a rider approached. To his surprise, it was young Tommy Wilson who helped at Preston's store. "Mr. Hawkins," the boy called, reining in his horse. "Miss Wakefield asks if you might call on her this afternoon. Mr. Preston will be meeting with lumber suppliers from Reading and won't return until evening." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Did she say why she wanted to see me?" Tommy shrugged. "Just said she had something important to discuss with you. She'll be at the store until 5. After the boy left, Henry debated with himself. Meeting Catherine alone could fuel town gossip, especially if Preston found out. But his curiosity and, he had to admit, his desire to see her again won out. At 3 o'clock, he rode into town, leaving Thunder at the livery stable before walking to Preston's Mercantile. The store occupied a prime location on Main Street, a large 2-story building with a false front and large display windows. Inside, shelves were stocked with everything from canned goods to mining equipment, fabric to firearms. Catherine was helping a customer select fabric when he entered. She looked different, her hair neatly styled, wearing a fashionable blue dress that complemented her eyes. When she saw him, a genuine smile lit her face in a way he hadn't seen during their brief encounters in town. "Mr. Hawkins," she said, approaching after finishing with the customer. "Thank you for coming." "Your message sounded important," he replied, conscious of the curious glances from other shoppers. Catherine nodded. "It is, but not something I'd like to discuss here. Could we speak upstairs? Mrs. Thornton is minding the store with me, so it would be perfectly proper." Henry followed her through a door at the back of the store and up a narrow staircase. The upper floor had been converted into living quarters, a sitting room, what appeared to be a bedroom through a partially open door, and a small kitchen area. "Please sit down," Catherine said, gesturing to one of 2 armchairs near the window that overlooked Main Street. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you." Henry remained standing, hat in hand. "What's this about, Miss Wakefield?" Catherine's composure faltered slightly. "I need your help, Mr. Hawkins, Henry, and your honesty." She took a deep breath. "I need to know about Jonathan Preston, the real Jonathan Preston, not the version he presents to me or writes about in letters." Henry hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "What makes you think there's another version?" "I'm not naive," she said, her blue eyes meeting his directly. "I've seen how people react to him, the respect mingled with fear, the way conversations stop when he enters a room. And I've noticed things since arriving." "What sort of things?" Catherine lowered her voice. Though they were alone. "He's controlling. Everything must be done his way, on his schedule. He speaks of our marriage as a business arrangement with specific duties. I'll be expected to perform." A blush colored her cheeks. "And then there are the rumors about his previous wives." Henry sighed, setting his hat on a small table, and finally taking the seat she'd offered. "What do you want to know?" "Everything you can tell me. Please." For the next half hour, Henry told her what he knew, how Preston's first wife had died in childbirth, along with the baby, after reportedly being worked to exhaustion in the store despite her condition. How the second wife, a quiet woman from Sacramento, had lasted 3 years before falling down the stairs in this very building, breaking her neck. No one had witnessed the accident, and Preston had shown little grief. There were whispers, of course, Henry said, but no evidence of foul play. Preston is powerful in Weaverville. He owns the mortgages on half the businesses in town, including the newspaper. Catherine listened intently, her face growing paler. And his temperament? Has he ever shown violence? Henry chose his words carefully. Not publicly, but there were bruises on his second wife that she explained away as clumsiness. And he has a reputation for ruthlessness in business. Men who've crossed him have found themselves ruined. Catherine stood, moving to the window. I suspected as much. He's been different since I arrived. Cold, demanding. The charming man from the letter seems to have vanished. What will you do? Henry asked quietly. She turned to face him, determination in her eyes. Leave. Break the contract, but I need help. He has my money, what little I brought with me. Says he's safeguarding it along with my papers. And after what you've told me, she left the implication hanging. Henry stood, moving closer to her. You think he might try to stop you? I know he would. He's already made it clear that he considers me his property. Last night Catherine faltered, then squared her shoulders. He tried to claim his husbandly rights early, said the contract gave him the authority. When I refused, he was furious, said I'd learn my place soon enough. Anger surged through Henry, hot and immediate. Did he hurt you? No, Mrs. Thornton interrupted us, a convenient customer emergency. But the look in his eyes, she shuddered. I can't marry him, Henry. I won't. You don't have to, he said firmly. I'll help you get away from here. Tonight, if necessary. Catherine looked both relieved and worried. Why would you risk his anger for me? You barely know me. Henry found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain the connection he'd felt from the moment he'd found her in that wrecked train car? The admiration that had grown as he witnessed her courage and determination? The undeniable attraction that had only strengthened during their brief time together? Let's just say I have a habit of helping people in trouble, he said finally, and I don't much care for bullies like Preston. She studied his face, seeming to read more than he'd said. Thank you, but I don't want you risking everything on my account. I have a plan, if you're willing to help. Catherine's plan was simple, but risky. Preston kept a safe in his office at the back of the store where he stored cash, important papers, and valuables, including her money and identification documents. She had discovered the combination by watching him open it several times, believing she couldn't see from her vantage point in the store. If I can get those papers and enough money for stage fare, I can be on tomorrow morning's coach to Sacramento, she explained. From there, I have a friend from school whose family might take me in until I can find work. And you want me to help you break into the safe? Henry asked, raising an eyebrow. No, she corrected. I'll get into the safe myself. What I need is someone to create a distraction that will get Preston out of the store long enough for me to do it. And possibly an escort to the stage depot tomorrow morning. Henry considered her plan. It was dangerous if caught. She could be charged with theft and he as an accomplice. But the alternative was leaving her to a fate that seemed increasingly grim. All right, he agreed, but with one condition. If anything goes wrong, you come to my ranch. It's 3 miles north of town, just past the old Miller Creek Bridge. The house is set back from the road, but you can't miss it. It has a red roof and a big oak tree in the yard. Catherine nodded. Thank you, Henry. I won't forget your kindness, whatever happens. They formulated their plan carefully. That evening, around 8 o'clock when the store would be closed but Preston would still be in his office doing accounts, Henry would create a commotion in the alley behind the building, something that would require Preston's personal attention. Catherine would use that opportunity to access the safe, retrieve her belongings, and be ready to leave at first light. As Henry prepared to leave, Catherine touched his arm, her eyes conveying more than her words. "Be careful. He's not a man to cross lightly." "Neither am I," Henry replied with a reassuring smile. "I'll see you tomorrow morning, Miss Wakefield, one way or another." That evening, as darkness fell over Weaverville, Henry positioned himself in the alley behind Preston's mercantile. Light shone from the office window, silhouetting Preston's figure as he bent over his ledgers. Henry had brought a wagon borrowed from a friend, loading it with empty barrels. His plan was simple: create enough noise and apparent property damage that Preston would have to investigate personally. Taking a deep breath, Henry tipped the wagon, sending the barrels crashing into the back steps of the store with a tremendous racket. He then slipped into the shadows, watching as Preston rushed to the window, then disappeared, presumably heading downstairs. Moments later, the back door burst open, and Preston emerged, lantern in hand. "What the hell's going on out here?" he demanded, surveying the scattered barrels. "Who's responsible for this?" From his hiding place, Henry watched as Preston moved further into the alley, examining the wagon and looking for the culprit. This was Catherine's chance with Preston outside and distracted. She should have clear access to the office and safe. Henry counted slowly in his head, giving her the time they'd agreed upon. Just as he reached 100, preparing to slip away, a voice behind him said, "Looking for something, Hawkins?" He turned to find Sheriff Miller standing there, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Evening, Sheriff," Henry said casually. "Just passing through." "With a wagon full of barrels that just happened to crash into Preston's store?" The sheriff's tone was skeptical. "What are you really doing here, Henry?" Before he could answer, a commotion from the direction of the store drew their attention. Preston was shouting, his voice rising in anger. "Thief! Stop her!" Henry's heart sank. Something had gone wrong. Catherine burst from the back door, clutching a small bag to her chest. She froze momentarily at the sight of Henry and the sheriff, then turned to flee in the opposite direction. "Catherine, wait!" Henry called, moving toward her. Preston appeared in the doorway, his face contorted with rage. "Stop her! She's stolen from my safe!" Sheriff Miller looked from Preston to Henry to the fleeing Catherine, understanding dawning in his eyes. "What's going on here, Henry?" "She's not stealing. She's taking what's rightfully hers," Henry explained quickly. "Her own money and papers. Preston's been holding them hostage to force her into marriage." The sheriff's expression hardened. "That true, Preston?" Preston approached, his voice cold with fury. "This is ridiculous. She's my fiancée, and she's attempting to break our contract by stealing from me. I want her arrested." During this exchange, Catherine had disappeared into the darkness beyond the alley. Henry silently hoped she remembered his directions to the ranch. "Contract or not, a woman has a right to her own possessions," Sheriff Miller said firmly. "If what Hawkins says is true—" "It's none of your concern," Preston snapped. "This is a private matter between me and my future wife." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Everything that happens in Weaverville is my concern, Preston. Now, how about we all go inside and discuss this civilized-like?" Preston looked as though he might refuse, then seemed to reconsider. "Fine. But Hawkins stays out of it. He's clearly conspired with her in this theft." "I'll decide who's involved," Miller replied evenly. "Henry, you coming?" Henry hesitated, torn between following them back into the store and going after Catherine. But revealing her likely destination would only put her in more danger if Preston managed to convince the sheriff of his version of events. "I'll come," he decided, but only to make sure Miss Wakefield's side of the story is properly represented. The discussion in Preston's office quickly turned heated. Preston produced the marriage contract Catherine had signed, pointing to clauses that essentially gave him control over her finances and movements until the wedding. Henry argued that such terms were tantamount to indentured servitude, while Sheriff Miller remained thoughtfully silent, examining the document carefully. "This contract," the sheriff said finally, "may be legal in the strictest sense, but I've never seen such restrictive terms for a marriage arrangement. Seems more like you're buying a slave than taking a wife." "Preston." Preston's face flushed with anger. "The terms are standard for mail-order brides. She knew what she was agreeing to." Did she? Henry challenged. Or did you present a very different picture in your letters? Miss Wakefield told me your correspondence painted you as a kind, respectful gentleman, looking for companionship, not a controlling tyrant. Watch your tongue, Hawkins, Preston hissed. You're already treading on dangerous ground. Sheriff Miller held up a hand. Enough. Here's what's going to happen. Miss Wakefield has her papers and money now, so that matter is settled. As for the contract, if she chooses not to fulfill it, that's between you and her, Preston. You can pursue civil action if you want, but I won't be arresting anyone tonight. Preston stared at the sheriff in disbelief. She broke into my safe. To retrieve her own property, Miller replied firmly. Now, it's late, and I imagine we've all had enough excitement for one evening. I suggest we revisit this matter in the morning when tempers have cooled. As they left the store, Sheriff Miller pulled Henry aside. I don't know where that young lady is heading, and I don't want to know. But you make sure she understands that Preston won't give up easily. He's not used to losing. Henry nodded. Thanks, Sheriff. I appreciate your understanding. Miller sighed. I've had my suspicions about Preston for years. Never could prove anything, but just make sure she's safe, you hear? With a grateful nod, Henry headed for his horse, then rode quickly toward his ranch, hoping Catherine had found her way there safely. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust, providing just enough light to navigate the familiar trail. As Henry approached his property, he scanned the surroundings for any sign of Catherine. The house was dark as he'd left it, but as he drew closer, he spotted a figure huddled on the porch steps. Relief flooded through him as he dismounted and approached. Catherine, she looked up, her face pale in the moonlight. Henry, thank God. I wasn't sure if I'd found the right place. Are you all right? Did anyone follow you? She shook her head. I don't think so. I took a roundabout way, like you suggested, but I'm afraid I've ruined everything. Preston saw me at the safe. He'll never let this go now. Henry helped her to her feet and unlocked the door, leading her inside. The ranch house was modest but comfortable, a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms off to the side. He lit a lamp, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. You're safe here for tonight, he assured her, moving to light the fire. The sheriff's on our side, more or less. He won't let Preston do anything rash. Catherine sank into a chair, the events of the evening clearly taking their toll. What happens now? The stage to Sacramento doesn't leave until morning, and Preston will surely be watching for me. Henry considered their options as he stoked the fire to life. We could try to reach the next town over Trinity Center. It's a hard ride, but there's another stage line there. Or I could just keep running, Catherine said quietly. Find work somewhere far from here. San Francisco, perhaps. Henry turned to look at her, struck by the determination in her voice despite her evident exhaustion. In the lamplight, with her hair falling loose around her shoulders and her eyes reflecting the growing firelight, she was breathtakingly beautiful and, more importantly, brave beyond measure. You don't have to decide tonight, he said gently. Get some rest. You can take my room. I'll sleep out here by the fire. Catherine met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Thank you, Henry, for everything. As she disappeared into the bedroom, Henry settled into a chair by the fire, his mind racing with possibilities. The rational part of him knew he should help Catherine leave in the morning, get her safely away from Preston and Weaverville. But another part, growing stronger by the hour, wanted her to stay. It was madness, of course. They'd known each other less than a week. And yet, hadn't his parents fallen in love after just 2 meetings? His father had always said when it came to matters of the heart, time was less important than the truth you felt in your soul. Henry was still mulling these thoughts when a sound outside caught his attention, hoofbeats approaching, multiple riders by the sound of it. He extinguished the lamp quickly and moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. 3 riders were approaching Preston in the lead, with 2 men Henry recognized as brothers who worked at Preston's lumber mill, tough characters known for their willingness to handle Preston's dirty work for the right price. Henry grabbed his rifle and moved quickly to the bedroom. Catherine was already awake. sitting up in bed with alarm on her face. "Preston's here," Henry whispered, "with the Miller brothers. We need to go now." She nodded, reaching for her boots. "How did he find us?" "Doesn't matter. There's a back door through the kitchen. My horse is in the barn, and there's another mount you can use. We'll head into the hills. I know places they won't find us." As they slipped out the back door, they could hear Preston pounding on the front, his voice carrying through the night air. "Hawkins, I know you're in there. Bring her out now, and maybe I won't burn this place to the ground." Henry led Catherine to the barn, quickly saddling the horses while she kept watch at the door. They could hear the front door of the house being broken open, followed by angry shouts as Preston and his men discovered the house empty. "They'll check the barn next," Henry said, helping Catherine onto a sturdy mare. "Stay close to me and don't look back." They slipped out the barn's rear door and into the pine forest that bordered Henry's property, just as lantern light appeared at the main barn entrance. Henry led them up a narrow trail that wound into the mountains, a hunting path he knew well, but one that would be difficult to follow in the dark for anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. They rode hard for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the mountains, before Henry finally called a halt in a small clearing beside a creek. The horses needed rest, and they needed to make a plan. "They won't find us here," Henry said, helping Catherine dismount. "This area is like a maze unless you know it well." Catherine sank down on a fallen log, her face drawn with fatigue and worry. "I'm so sorry, Henry. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. Your house is just a house," he interrupted gently. "What matters is that you're safe." She looked up at him, moonlight filtering through the pines to illuminate her face. "Why are you doing all this for me? Risking everything?" Henry knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. "Because from the moment I found you in that train wreck, something changed. I can't explain it properly. I just know that helping you, protecting you, it feels like the most important thing I've ever done." Catherine's eyes widened, and for a moment, Henry feared he'd said too much. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss that nevertheless sent electricity coursing through him. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. "I feel it too. It's madness, isn't it? We barely know each other." "Sometimes," Henry said softly, "the heart knows what the mind cannot comprehend." They stayed in that clearing until dawn, talking quietly, making plans, and stealing occasional kisses that grew increasingly passionate. By morning, they had reached a decision they would head north, crossing into Oregon territory where Preston's influence couldn't reach them. Henry knew people in Jacksonville who would help them start anew. "What about your ranch?" Catherine asked as they prepared to continue their journey. "Your life here?" Henry secured the saddle on Thunder, considering her question. "I built that ranch from nothing once. I can do it again, somewhere else. Some things are worth more than property or position." The look Catherine gave him, then full of wonder and growing affection, confirmed he was making the right choice. They traveled north through the mountains, avoiding main roads and settlements where they might be recognized. By nightfall, they had reached a small hunting cabin Henry knew of, abandoned except during deer season. "We should be safe here for the night," he said, leading the tired horses to a lean-to beside the cabin. "Tomorrow we'll cross into Oregon." The cabin was rustic but sound, with a stone fireplace and enough leftover supplies to make a simple meal. As they sat before the fire, sharing a tin cup of coffee, Catherine studied Henry's face in the flickering light. "Tell me about your life," she said, "before you found me in that train wreck." "I want to know everything about the man I'm running away with." Henry smiled. "Not much to tell. Born in Missouri, fought for the Union in the war, drifted west afterward. Tried mining for a while, then ranching. Found I had a knack for it." "Family?" His expression sobered. "Parents died before the war. No siblings. There was a girl once in Sacramento, but it didn't work out." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. Henry shrugged. "Don't be. If things had gone differently, I wouldn't be here now, with you." He reached for her hand. "What about you? You mentioned Boston, but not much else. Catherine leaned against him, her warmth a comfort in the cool cabin. I was raised to be a proper Boston lady, piano lessons, French, watercolors. My mother died when I was 8. After that, it was just father and me. He was dedicated to his patients, often treating those who couldn't pay. It left us comfortable, but not wealthy. And when he died? His creditors took almost everything. My uncle, my mother's brother, agreed to take me in, but made it clear I was a burden. When I saw Mr. Preston's advertisement, she sighed. It seemed like providence, a fresh start in a new place, independence of a sort. Henry pulled her closer. You'll have your fresh start, I promise. That night, they shared the cabin's narrow cot, holding each other for warmth and comfort. Though desire simmered between them, they both understood that some things were worth waiting for the right time, the right circumstances. Instead, they talked late into the night, sharing dreams and fears, filling in the gaps of their short acquaintance with the stories that had shaped them. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. They set out early, following game trails and logging roads that would keep them away from the main thoroughfares. By midday, they had crossed into Oregon territory, though the landscape remained similar: towering pines, rugged mountains, and valleys carved by ancient rivers. How much farther to Jacksonville? Catherine asked as they paused to rest the horses beside a mountain stream. 3 days, maybe 4 at this pace, Henry replied, scanning the horizon. We'll need to find a place to... He stopped abruptly, tensing as he caught sight of movement on the ridge above them. Get behind me, he said quietly, reaching for his rifle. Catherine moved closer to the horses, her hand going to the small pistol Henry had given her from his saddlebag just in case, he'd said, though he hoped she'd never need to use it. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the sky. Even at a distance, Henry recognized Preston's tall figure in the center. Somehow they'd managed to track them, despite all precautions. They've found us, Catherine whispered, her voice tight with fear. Henry calculated their options quickly. They could try to outrun Preston and his men, but their horses were tired, and the terrain ahead was unfamiliar. Fighting was a last resort. 3 against 1 were poor odds, even with his skill. There's a mining settlement about 5 miles east, he said, making his decision. Enough people that Preston won't try anything too drastic. We'll head there. They mounted quickly, but before they could ride out, a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt near Thunder's hooves. The horse reared, nearly unseating Henry. That was a warning, Preston's voice called down. The next one won't be. Henry steadied his mount, then turned to Catherine. When I say go, ride east as fast as you can. Follow the stream it leads to the settlement. Don't stop for anything. I won't leave you, she protested. You have to. I'll be right behind you. He squeezed her hand. Trust me. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Henry raised his rifle and fired back, aiming above the men's heads, a warning of his own. Then he turned to Catherine. Go! Now! She hesitated for just a moment, then urged her mare forward, splashing through the stream and disappearing into the trees on the other side. Henry fired again, providing cover, then wheeled Thunder around to follow. He had barely made it to the stream when he heard hoofbeats thundering down the slope behind him. Preston and his men were in pursuit. Henry pushed Thunder harder, the powerful horse responding despite his fatigue. The forest was dense here, the trees providing some cover as he followed Catherine's trail. He could hear her ahead, crashing through underbrush, staying close to the stream as he'd instructed. Behind him, Preston and his men were gaining ground, their fresh horses covering the distance quickly. A shot whistled past Henry's ear, too close for comfort. He ducked lower over Thunder's neck, urging more speed. Ahead, the trees were thinning. They were approaching a clearing. Catherine burst into the open space first, her horse skidding slightly on the damp ground near the stream bank. Henry followed seconds later, immediately recognizing their predicament. The clearing ended at a sharp drop-off where the stream became a waterfall, plunging 30 feet to rocks below. "Henry!" Catherine called, her face pale with fear as she reined in her mare at the edge. "Back into the trees!" he shouted, turning Thunder toward the forest edge. But it was too late. Preston and his men emerged from the woods, spreading out to block their escape. "End of the line, Hawkins," Preston called, his rifle aimed steadily at Henry's chest. The Miller brothers flanked him, their own weapons at the ready. "Send the woman over to me, and maybe you'll walk away from this." Henry dismounted slowly, keeping his body between Preston and Catherine. "It's over, Preston. We've crossed into Oregon. Your contracts, your influence, they mean nothing here." Preston's laugh was cold. "You think boundaries matter to me? Money speaks the same language everywhere." He gestured with his rifle. "Catherine, come here now. You've had your adventure, but it's time to honor your commitments." "I made no commitments to a liar and a bully," Catherine replied, her voice surprisingly steady as she dismounted, moving to stand beside Henry. "The contract is void. You misrepresented yourself and your intentions." Preston's face darkened with anger. "You ungrateful little—" He cut himself off, visibly regaining control. "Fine, if that's how you want it." He nodded to the Miller brothers. "Kill Hawkins. The woman comes with me." Everything happened in a blur after that. The brothers raised their rifles. Henry pushed Catherine behind him, reaching for his own weapon. A shot rang out, but not from any of them. From the trees to their left, a voice called out, "Drop those weapons, now!" Sheriff Miller emerged from the forest, rifle in hand, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Next man who raises a gun gets a bullet," he warned. Preston's face contorted with rage. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff. You're out of your jurisdiction." "Maybe so," Miller agreed calmly. "But I telegraphed the authorities in Jacksonville about a kidnapping in progress. They were kind enough to grant me temporary authority to pursue the matter." He nodded toward Henry and Catherine. "Though I'm beginning to think the lady wasn't kidnapped at all." Relief flooded through Henry. "How did you find us?" Miller smiled slightly. "You're not the only one who knows these mountains, son. And Preston here left a trail a blind man could follow, asking questions in every settlement, waving money around. Not subtle." Preston's grip tightened on his rifle. "This is ridiculous. The woman is my fiancée. She stole from me and ran off with this ranch hand." "That's not how she tells it," Miller replied. "And I'm inclined to believe her, especially after finding some interesting documents in your office when we went looking for evidence of your whereabouts." Preston paled visibly. "You had no right to—" "I had every right with a judge's order," Miller interrupted. "Seems you've been conducting some rather questionable business practices. Tax evasion, for starters. And there are some interesting notes regarding your late wives that the circuit judge would like to discuss with you." The Miller brothers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reconsidering their allegiance in light of this new information. "Lower your weapons, boys," Sheriff Miller instructed. "Don't make this worse than it already is." After a moment's hesitation, the brothers complied, letting their rifles drop. Preston, however, remained defiant, his face a mask of fury. "This isn't over," he hissed, glaring at Catherine. "No one humiliates me and gets away with it." "It is over," Miller said firmly. "Now lower that rifle before I forget I'm an officer of the law." For a tense moment, it seemed Preston might defy him. Then, with a curse, he lowered his weapon. "You'll regret this. All of you." As the sheriff's deputies moved to secure Preston and the Miller brothers, Catherine turned to Henry, relief evident in her eyes. "It's really over?" Henry pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Yes," he murmured against her hair. "It's over." Sheriff Miller approached them, a knowing look in his eyes. "You two all right?" "Better than all right," Henry replied, not releasing Catherine. "Thank you, Sheriff." "For everything," Miller nodded. "Don't thank me yet. There's still the matter of breaking and entering, conspiracy, fleeing across state lines." He paused, noting their concerned expressions, then broke into a smile. "Which I'm sure can all be cleared up once Miss Wakefield gives her full statement about Preston's actions." Catherine's relief was palpable. "I'll tell you everything." "Good." Miller glanced back at his deputies, who were securing Preston to his horse. "We'll escort these men back to Weaverville for trial. You two might want to come back as well to clear your names officially." Henry looked at Catherine, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, understanding passing between them. "We'll come back," Henry told the sheriff. But afterward, he left the sentence unfinished. Miller smiled knowingly. Afterward, I suspect Weaverville might be losing 2 of its residents. He tipped his hat to Catherine. Safe journey, wherever you decide to go. The journey back to Weaverville was tense but uneventful. Preston remained sullenly silent, while the Miller brothers, hoping for leniency, had begun cooperating with the sheriff, revealing details of Preston's various schemes and manipulations over the years. In town, the news of Preston's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it spread like wildfire. Many were shocked, but others admitted they had long harbored suspicions about the powerful merchant. Catherine gave her statement to Judge Wilson, who had ridden in from the county seat specifically for this case. Her testimony, combined with the documents found in Preston's office and the statements from the Miller brothers, painted a damning picture. Preston was charged with fraud, extortion, tax evasion, and most seriously, questions were reopened regarding the deaths of his previous wives. Through it all, Henry remained by Catherine's side, a steady presence as she recounted her ordeal. When they weren't required at the courthouse, they spent their time at Henry's ranch, repairing the damage Preston's men had done and discussing their future. Jacksonville is still an option, Henry said one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Or we could try California, San Francisco, maybe. Catherine leaned against his shoulder. What about here? Weaverville is your home. Home is where you are, he replied simply. After everything that's happened, I thought you might want a fresh start somewhere else. She was quiet for a moment, considering. I came west looking for a new beginning. I thought I needed a husband, any husband, to secure my future. She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. What I found instead was that I'm stronger than I knew, and that when the right person comes along, it has nothing to do with security or contracts. Henry's heart swelled with emotion. Catherine. I love you, Henry Hawkins, she said softly. I know it's happened quickly, and some might say it's madness, but I know what I feel. He cupped her face gently, looking into the blue eyes that had captivated him from the first. I love you too, and if it's madness, then I never want to be sane again. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of all that was to come. When they finally parted, breathless, Catherine rested her forehead against his. Ask me, she whispered. Henry didn't pretend to misunderstand. He slid from the porch swing to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. Catherine Wakefield, will you marry me? Not because of a contract or obligation, but because somehow, in the midst of danger and chaos, we found each other. Because I want to build a life with you, wherever that might be. Tears glistened in her eyes. Yes, she said simply. Yes, with all my heart. They were married 2 weeks later in Weaverville's small church, with Sheriff Miller standing as Henry's best man and the doctor's wife, who had taken Catherine under her wing, serving as her matron of honor. The town turned out in force, partly from curiosity, partly from genuine affection for Henry, and increasingly for Catherine, who had shown remarkable grace throughout the ordeal. Preston remained in jail, awaiting trial, his empire crumbling as investigations revealed the full extent of his misdeeds. The mercantile was sold to pay his debts, with portions going to those he had wronged over the years. After the wedding, Henry and Catherine decided to stay in Weaverville after all. The town was changing, healing from Preston's influence, and they wanted to be part of its renewal. Henry's ranch flourished under their joint care, and Catherine found her place in the community, eventually opening a small school for the children of miners and ranchers who had previously gone without proper education. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the same porch where Henry had proposed, Catherine handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" he asked, smiling as he untied the string. "Open it and see," she replied, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. Inside was a tiny pair of knitted booties. Henry looked up, momentarily confused, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Catherine, are you?" She nodded, her eyes shining. In about 6 months, if Dr. Miller's correct. How do you feel about becoming a father? Henry gathered her into his arms, his heart so full he could barely speak. It's more than I ever dared hope for, he managed finally, his voice thick with emotion. As the sun set over the mountains where they had first met, where a derailed train had brought them together through chance or fate, Henry marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From the wreckage of disaster had come the greatest joy of his life. I found more than a mail-order bride in that train wreck, he murmured against her hair. I found my heart. Catherine smiled up at him, love shining in her eyes. And I found not just escape, but a home. The home I never knew I was looking for until I found you. Their son, James, was born the following winter, a strong, healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. 2 years later, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth. The Hawkins ranch became known throughout the county for its hospitality, prosperity, and the palpable love that filled it. Sometimes, visitors would ask how Henry and Catherine had met, and they would exchange a knowing glance before telling the tale of a train derailed in the mountains and a cowboy who found more than he bargained for in the wreckage. It was a story of danger and courage, of choices and consequences, but most of all, it was a story of love found in the most unexpected circumstances, a love that had transformed 2 lives, and, in its quiet way, an entire town. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the mountain air carried the scent of pine and promise, Henry and Catherine would sit on their porch, hands entwined, marveling at the journey that had brought them together and the life they had built from the ashes of disaster. In those moments, they knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest blessings arise from the most unexpected calamities, and that true love, once found, could overcome any obstacle the world might place in its path.